All right, guys. Lisa Genevieve's here at BottomLine,
And this is Philip from BottomLine as well.
today with Gursh Bal,
Hey.
who is the Director of Business Development at Virtuoso Energy. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, the first thing I want to ask you is, what is Virtuoso Energy?
That's it. Always the first question I tend to get asked. So, Virtuoso Energy is a sustainable energy lifestyle company, and I know that sounds a little bit ambiguous considering in the times that we're living, where we're a newer company and we're in a newer industry as well too. And it comes down to helping individuals live sustainably in their everyday lives. So, in our organization, we have a few individuals that identified that there's about 1.2 to 1.5 billion people on the planet that don't have the basic access to amenities that we do as Canadians. So as an organization, we determined that we wanted to make sure that we were using our resources responsibly in our everyday lives. And our goal as a company is to enable those individuals, whether it be at their work or at home, to live sustainably. And what that looks like as far as the way that we go about it is to offer services in the areas of energy efficiency, specifically to do with LED retrofits, solar PV to do with energy production, and electric vehicle charging infrastructure to be able to support their transportation. And the areas that we focus on in those are in design, engineering, installation, and maintenance, with our ultimate goal being to create an exciting future.
Great, great. That's pretty interesting. I was actually going to ask you about how you get started, but I think you pretty much covered that. So I think what one thing I would want to ask now is perhaps what's the common misconception about you and your business?
That these things that we're doing don't work. They don't make financial sense. In some cases, like they're not viable. They're still super expensive. Those are the main ones that we tend to hear a lot of the time.
Interesting. And I think there is still like so many misconceptions about the energy industry just in general. I know there's one thing that I'm actually really curious about, and it's when it comes to renewables, how do they store that? Because it's not like oil where it can go into a pipeline, or gas that goes into a pipeline. So how does that work?
Specifically on the storage or the transfer of the energy itself?
Well, I'd love to hear both if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Sure. So storage, it's really simple or it's very complex. The first place that energy created from renewables would go into is the grid. So generally, whether it be a city, a town, whatever it might be, that's generally the first thing that renewable energy would flow into. The second thing it typically flows into is batteries. Now, batteries can be defined as a few different things. Typically, when we're looking at it from an industry perspective, lithium-ion batteries are kind of the hottest, sexy thing out there that everybody wants to take a look at. So that's generally the first area that people will lean into. And then there's some really creative areas that renewable energies can go into. So they can feed gravity-fed systems in which there's compressor pumps that allow for gravity pressure to build up with a weighted system that allows the transfer of energy from potential to kinetic. There's also areas and projects that are going along the Rocky Mountains in which they use compressor systems, renewables to power a compression air system that fills caverns with air, and then as that air releases, it creates a differential in overall energy, and that provides power as well too. There's bladder systems that you can put underneath lakes that are designed to be able to be same principle, to be able to fill up and put under pressure. So realistically, with renewables, you can get very creative, because the one thing that renewables has that's very reliable is weather is very predictable. Even though we always know the sun is going to come up every single morning, and we do have some very good weather data specifically with wind. So the patterns are actually fairly predictable. It's not that it is determined that they're intermittent, but they know when they are going to be intermittent.
That makes sense. Well, we hope the sun's going to come up every morning anyway.
Well, if it doesn't, we're all done anyways, right? So
Totally.
Yeah. So the industry in itself is quite a remarkable one, but what would you say sets Virtuoso Energy apart? So what makes the company itself that remarkable from its competition?
Yeah, so that's an odd one, because everybody always wants to think that they're unique and they're better than everybody else. The one thing that is really interesting about the sustainability industry that we're already seeing is that everybody wants to work together. But what really separates us as a company is that we really focus in on our clientele and what they need. So in a lot of different cases, when we're dealing with renewable technology and anything along those types of services, they're very complex. to give you a basic example, throwing solar panels on your house technically makes your house a power plant. So when you think of a power plant, you think of this massive facility that's able to power, but it's as simple as having solar panels on a rooftop, but there's a variety of components that are involved in that. And typically how the industry has sold these products in the past have been, this is A, this is B, this is how they work together, and this is how much energy you're going to get. What Virtuoso Energy has been able to determine is what is the why, what are the pieces and the things that people are looking for in our services and our offerings that really sing home to them and allow them to understand the benefits beyond just the how and the what. So that's the major differentiation point. As far as what we actually stand apart from a more tangible perspective is our partnerships. So we actually represent Porsche right across Alberta, and we've been responsible for a lot of Tesla's work across Western Canada as well. And those formative relationships, including ones such as ChargePoint, has allowed us to position ourselves in the market as market leaders.
That's awesome. So does this mean that you get to drive a Porsche or a Tesla?
Yeah. I personally don't own one. Where I'm not that well off by any means yet, but yeah, we do get access to them.
One day.
Awesome.
That's exciting.
Oh, yeah.
I noticed that you guys, and I think this is accurate, you did a project with Bullfrog Power. We saw that on your website.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more? It looked quite interesting.
That one's a really cool one. So first and foremost, I'll probably sing the praises of Prospect Human. They're an organization that takes individuals such as veterans that haven't been able to, I guess more or less they've been pushed into a corner in society and they've almost been forgotten about. And what Prospect Human does is they allow those individuals to get back up on their feet through training. And that solar PV system was brought into play by one of our pre-existing clientele, a gentleman by the name of Chris. We had done his residential property a few years back, and he's like, "Hey, I really like this. It's working well. I want to take this to my employer." So we sat down with the employer over some exhaustive meetings, ironed out all the different pieces, figured out some different funding because Prospect Human is a non-for-profit, and helped provide Bullfrog with the information that they needed in order for the project to be successful. And what it came down to at the end of the day is that solar PV system on that rooftop, it wasn't a full offset, but it provided funding for 16 individuals a year for a minimum of 25 years to be able to go through their program. So it was able to reduce their overhead by that much.
Wow, that is impressive and really cool.
Some really, really impressive stuff here, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's turning a roof into a valuable asset, which hasn't necessarily been a thing in the past, right? So,
absolutely.
Great. Speaking of that, what would you say, can you tell us one of your greatest lessons so far, lessons you've learned at Virtuoso?
Yeah. Especially with new businesses, if you're trying to start something, be ready to fight off your back at all times. If you take a look at like a company like ours in what Alberta is touted as an oil and gas province, I think oil and gas is one of our greatest assets, but it's not the only thing that we do. From direct revenue, it's only 16.8% of our annual GDP per year. So that's not the entire economy, even though it does have indirect benefits to us overall. We have a lot of capability here, but unfortunately, we have been deemed the polar opposite of that. So one of the greatest lessons that we have learned is that collaboration is considerably more important than competition, and we have to learn how to work together. And we have to also learn how to work together with other industries. And the other thing that we've learned as well too is the viability in a business like ours. So even though COVID has been wiping out a lot of different businesses, it's been affecting a lot of individuals' lives, it hasn't affected us as much because there's so much forward projection in an industry like ours. So make sure that, to be able to provide those two things into one statement, make sure that whatever you're doing, you're ready to fight, and make sure that whatever you're fighting for is good.
Oh, I so love that. And I love that you guys are such a purpose-based brand. And you also bring that collaboration piece in. I mean, those are two huge values of ours. And I love to hear other businesses that are playing nice in the sandbox with their competition and finding ways, to work together. It's really cool.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's kind of a little burden thing, right? Everybody wants to try to get this economy going again. So it's always nice. So true.
One of the geeky things I wanted to ask you about today was electric cars. And I keep saying, my husband's been teasing me for a while that I eventually am going to need to get a new car. And I say, I'm holding out. I'm waiting until there's a car that's just going to drive me to work. And then my dream of having a driver has come true. Where do you think in 5 years electric cars will be?
Based on, so if I take it from an opinion basis, it's almost irrelevant. Like, I mean, I'm always going to have a biased perspective, so I'll give you some data metrics. There was a few different entities that did some analysis recently on the EV market overall in Canada, and basically by 2030, that they're saying that it'll be one out of every 3 cars will be an electric vehicle or new purchase vehicles in Canada. And if we're talking about globally, I mean, from a global perspective, electric vehicles in 2019 reached 2% market penetration. So typically from a marketing perspective, once something has achieved 1% market penetration, it's pretty much just a matter of time. And where do I really see electric vehicles in 5 years? The price will be more affordable, the battery technology will be better, and people who have combustion vehicles and they're buying them new will be made fun of.
Interesting. I like it.
Kind of looking into getting an electric car for myself too, you know?
Well, if I can give you guys any piece of advice, how it typically works in the Canadian automotive industry is that the regulations follow roughly about 24 months behind what happens in the United States. So some major changes did happen in January 2019. And so and what I mean by that is like with the different, with tariffs, the trades, the manufacturing processes, and the way that electric vehicles were coming into the market. So Canadians overall will be reaping the benefits in early 2021. So we're right around that corner. There's only about 6 or 7 months back. So if you are looking, I'd probably start recommending looking at the closer to the end of the year. If you're looking to doing it now, see if you can wait. Maybe public transportation, even though with COVID, that's probably not the best idea. Maybe just walk.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, that's just some industry insight, but we're going to see some awesome stuff coming onto the market really quickly.
Okay. That's pretty good, pretty good. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges as from an industry perspective now, not for Virtuoso itself, but from the entire industry itself?
From the entire industry itself is going to be education. So a lot of people will be like, "Oh, the government's not supporting us," and that's fine. Like whatever, the government's going to do whatever they need to do. The government has bigger priorities right now than funding and getting other industries off the ground. If an industry is viable, it'll be able to stand on its own 2 feet. That's what I personally believe, and I think that's an Alberta methodology as well too in some cases. So government help does always bring up, but what it really comes down to is education. As soon as people understand the benefits of these different items, the longevity, the reduced maintenance, the ability to be able to control and own your energy, so energy security in the form of solar, really being able to allow for longer sustainable growth is going to be the major thing. So that's that education that's lacking, is that as a nation, as humanity overall, we need to stop thinking about short-term gratification and think of long-term potential growth. We don't need to go out into the forest and hunt for our food anymore. So why do we always think weekly and monthly? We should be thinking yearly and by decades and plan out that way, right? So it's a shift perception, and it does come down to education. So there has to be some potential reform, or some people out there that are doing some really good marketing and getting the news out there in the right way.
Excellent points. Very excellent points. What about when it comes to like changes in the industry? I mean, I'm sure you've had to evolve and pivot and shift a lot, not just with COVID, but just in general. But has there been, one big event, I guess, that you can reference that you learned a lot from, and how that might have impacted the business or even your customers?
Yeah, so actually the government change up was a big one. So when specifically, this is specific to Alberta, but when we saw the NDP come into play and then leave, unfortunately, in some cases, and then the UCP come in for some, unfortunately, and some good. So they're both good and bad. I don't necessarily have any affiliation with any political party. I think I'm too young to have a really wise position on that yet. I think I have a lot of learning to do. But one of the major things that we did find out when we were going through that process was that there's different methodologies in order to be able to provide people with the things that they need. The NDP government had done cash upfront rebates for solar PV projects across Alberta. And then the UCP had done some back-end work on the legal parameters and the regulations to be able to allow for industry and individuals that understand the legal side of things to be able to function within those parameters. So what we learned ultimately is that you can't rely on the government to be able to provide your business with viability. If that's how your company is functioning, then it's actually not viable at all. So that was a big thing for us too, because we've been around for 5 years, and two of those years we did see some benefits from the previous governments in play. So that was one big learning lesson, is to be able to how to shift out of that and not be dependent on an external entity and create self-sustainability internally. And then the other thing as well too is to be able to understand the framework of the political parties that are in place. So making sure that you understand how to work with the individuals that are in power is very critical as well too. Nobody's bad, nobody's good, everybody's neutral. You just have to be able to understand how to work with them.
I love your views in that nobody's bad and nobody's good, and that you kind of, at least I think what you're saying is everybody has something to contribute, even if it's a different opinion.
Yeah. I think I truly think reality is neutral, right? So it's just how you perceive it is how it's going to turn out.
Totally.
Great. Speaking of contributions, so I have, it's kind of like a two-edged question. So you earlier talked about education. So my question now is, in terms of education, is Virtuoso Energy looking to do some kind of outreach, or is there anything Virtuoso Energy is doing to kind of promote that education in the sector? And then also, is Virtuoso Energy doing any kind of CSR? What kind of CSR does Virtuoso do?
Yeah, so absolutely, yes, on both sides. So I'll start off with the education side of things. We do webinars bi-weekly. I just did one last week about the future value of solar with COVID, and it was a breakdown of escalation costs in electricity that we've seen historically in different regions right across Canada in comparison to the United States. Some speculation about what the market looks like in the future, and an analysis of the Canadian pricing index as well as inflation. So that was one specific one. I think I've done like 6 or 7 different education sessions, and actually tomorrow as well, speaking to a group of grade 10 students at one of the schools inside the public school board, to be able to just provide them with some cursory level of knowledge about energy efficiency and solar. So we do a lot of work. Some other individuals in the company have done some outreach as well. So Kai was able to fly out to Nicaragua right before the revolution happened, and he was out there commissioning and helping get about 100 microgrid projects off the ground. And I'm currently working, and we talked about this as well, Philip, with some companies in Lagos, in Nigeria specifically, to help them understand electric vehicles and getting that infrastructure off the ground there as well too. So realistically for us, because we know that Canada's greatest strength is its diversity, but is also simultaneously our greatest weakness, because not only is being different great, it's also very hard to be able to figure out how to work together when everybody's so different. So we know how to be able to navigate that because we're a very diverse group of individuals. So when it comes down to education, that's the first piece. And then the second part there is touching on the CSR side of things. So internally, one of the accountants that we have in our team is slowly becoming an expert in ESG. So more or less like how to quantify like carbon offsets, how to be able to make sure that the governance is correct as an organization. So we do have all of those pieces baked into the back, and we have our SDGs aligned as well too, which is the Sustainable Development Goals, which includes like good places to work, empowering women, proper education, things along those lines. We have that all baked into our company, and that was done a few years back when we determined exactly how important it was. And then we also follow the 7-pillar methodology for sustainability and business practices, which we've probably executed about 30 to 40% of that. So we have a long way to go on all of those different things. And it's a moving target. I don't think we'll ever be able to reach our goal, because every time we do, we're just going to adjust it for a higher and higher threshold ultimately.
Awesome. Really, really great. So many initiatives you guys are working on.
Yeah, very interesting.
You have to. That's what you have to do to stay competitive, right? So
yeah, for sure. Well, I think our final question for you today is really, what's next for you guys? Where are you headed in the next, year, 18 months, and what does that journey look like?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're working on right now, and I can't go too deeply into this, is being able to increase the overall efficiency of the industry as a whole. So with our 5 years of experience specifically in the industry and our varied experience from other industries coming into this one, we have a really like competent team. And what it comes down to ultimately is that we've been able to identify some major weaknesses that exist in the overall industry. And as an organization, we're starting to point at those different gaps and saying, how can we fix these things? So whether it be different like tech platforms that we're looking at creating, different apps that we can be able to bring onto the market, or even some small fixes that we can provide from a governance perspective. That's what the next 5 years look like for us. And then ultimately we want to be able to achieve sales, operational, and customer excellence over the next 5 years as well too. That we want to get as close to 100% success rate as we can on those sides of things.
Amazing. Oh, it'll be exciting to sit back and watch you guys do it.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's fun for sure. I think it's nice to see that even during this time, like nobody in our company got laid off. More people have been brought on, and to be able to help even the demand that we currently have and the individuals that we are able to capture at the moment. I think one of the really good things for companies that are looking at potentially coming into Alberta, there's so much talent sitting waiting, and these are
Yeah.
individuals that you want to say a lot of time. Well, why don't you just move? It's like this is home, right? Alberta's beautiful. The weather's good here. It's a safe place. There's not really anything too much that you have to worry about. So it's almost unreasonable to have that as an option. So there's a lot of people here who are just looking for an opportunity to be able to provide their skill sets, and we've been able to find a lot of really good talent in the last couple of weeks here as we've been looking as well too, which is nice to see.
Wonderful. That is so great to hear. Well, listen, I really appreciate you taking the
Yeah.
time to speak with us today.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. It was awesome.
You bet.